Hello everyone and welcome back to Dragalia Foundry, a fan channel where everything Dragalia Lost can be found. This video is going to contain my review of the latest summon showcase. It's a prize showcase, this time around starring Dragonyule Ilia. She is featured on the showcase at an appearance rate up, and also wyrmsigil eligible and present on this showcase is Dragonyule Nevin. He doesn't have an appearance rate up, but you technically can summon him on this showcase, and thankfully, if you missed out on Jaldabaoth showcase, well, you could technically spark for him here too, so I'm glad to see that as an option. Dragonyule Ilia, of course, the main reason you'd want to consider summoning on this showcase with her having the appearance rate up. There are a few other wyrmsigil options in the dragons, but nothing particularly remarkable, and nothing else on an appearance rate up besides Dragonyule Ilia. So I've waited a couple days since the release of this showcase to make this video talking about Ilia, and fortunately this banner, unlike the previous one, is around for quite a while. It lasts from December 3rd until December 14th, so you have plenty of time to make a decision on whether or not to summon, and on the 14th, we should get a preview about what the next summon showcase is going to be. Probably going to be a Gala remix. It also might be some type of seasonal rerun of previous Dragonyule adventurers, or maybe a combination thereof. So there's plenty of time, no rush on this showcase. You have time if you want to use daily deals. That's the way that I've been approaching this so far. And it is a prize showcase, meaning you are going to get goodies every time you do a summon, with better rewards guaranteed in tenfold summons. I've said this in every past video about prize showcases, but the prizes are sort of the cherry on top. They're the icing, but not the cake. So you really want to make your decision here on whether or not to summon, about whether you want Ilia in your collection, Dragonyule Ilia, and not so much about the prizes. Yes, it's nice to get them as a bonus, but as good as some of the items are, they're uncommon and you can't count on the prizes. If you have enough summoning resources, you actually can count on getting the adventure, even if it comes down to sparking. So that's kind of my take on this being a prize showcase. Certainly rather have that than just the straight up normal banner. It definitely makes it feel a little bit better. The other thing to remind is Dragonyule Ilia is a limited time adventurer. She's not going to be back as part of the permanent summoning pool. You're not going to randomly pick her up in the future on Gala showcases or any other kind of showcase unless she's explicitly rerun some point down the road. The same is true of Dragonyule Nevin here, so this is your best shot for the foreseeable future at having these adventures in your collection. Alright, with all of that being said, you may have seen a few days ago I decided to summon on Jaldabaoth's and Nevin's showcase, and I went into that not knowing exactly how many resources it would take for me to pull them both. The reason I ended up making that decision was that day was the preview for Ilia, and it was the last day to summon on that banner. And ultimately, when I did my at-a-glance comparison of Ilia to Jaldabaoth, it seemed to me that Jaldabaoth just had more to offer. Plus, on Jaldabaoth Showcase, I also had better chances of getting Dragonyule Nevin. So that is ultimately what led me to feel the previous showcase was a little bit better than Ilia's showcase here. But that doesn't mean that Ilia is by any means bad. She actually looks like a very strong adventurer. Now that she's out in the wild, a lot of players just wanted to summon for Ilia anyway. She's definitely proven that she is a powerful DPS option. There are some questions about how she'll fare in future content, such as the Primordial Great Worm challenges, Primordial Midgard Stormer, but as of now, she's a strong Flame Element DPS, one of the best. So, despite Jaldabaoth being extremely good, even if you missed out and chose to skip over his showcase for this, I do think Ilia is comparably good. She just doesn't have the same level of utility. There are other things that she can provide that Jaldabaoth can't necessarily do, where she may be very helpful in the future. And certainly she compares to any top flame DPS as far as her damage output, so that's also a positive. But I ended up leaning toward that previous showcase. I still think that one's slightly better. Having said that, I'm probably going to try and get Ilia too, since my luck worked out really well in my last summoning session. So let's talk about Ilia's kit for today. This is a decision you'll probably want to wait on until you see the Gala remix if you're still in a wait and see mode at this point. For a lot of players, just seeing Ilia here, they already wanted to summon for her, she's such a cool character, or maybe they already wanted to summon for Nevin and Gatov, or perhaps they're waiting for New Year. So if you're in those camps where the character pull hasn't led you to summon already and you're really on the fence, definitely wait until the end of the showcase. Maybe the remix will be valuable to you if you missed past Dragonyule adventures, plus whatever Gala is at an appearance rate up. But otherwise, I think Ilia's good. The question is, what are we getting down the road, and how are you going to use her right now? One super cool thing about Ilia's presence here is we're getting Legend difficulty of Jaldabaoth's trial on December 8th. This showcase will be live when that trial releases, so you'll actually be able to check it out and see what it's like before deciding whether or not you feel you need to pull for Ilia. So I really appreciate when that happens. It's always a little frustrating when there's a good adventure or dragon in an element of endgame content that's about to release, but it's not actually out yet. So you don't have that extra opportunity to see if they'll actually do well in that content. In this case, we're actually going to be able to test Ilia in Legend Jaldabaoth. Players out there who have her are going to be able to try her out, and you'll have something like 5 days from that point before making a decision on whether or not to summon. So kudos for that. I think that's a really nice choice here. And from there, the only ambiguities are Asura Legend difficulty, that's a little bit of a question mark, and the Primordial Great Worms, Primordial Midgard Stormer. Alright, so let's talk about Ilia's kit now, and get into it here. Of course, much has been said on her outfit. I think it's super cool. I like that she has the snowboard, of course, the goggles with the little star pattern, and the scarf. Really nice. Of course, Mordecai in the background. Anyway, let's continue on here and talk about her kit itself. So full throttle ride, it's shareable with a share cost of 5. This consumes the entire alchemy gauge and all alchemic cartridges and deals damage to enemies directly ahead. If 2 or more cartridges are consumed, this damage and its area of effect will be increased based on the number of cartridges consumed. Changing direction is possible during the attack. So this deals 1 hit of 180 damage, 9 hits of 90 damage, and then depending on how many cartridges you consume, it scales in damage, with the best output being when you have 3 cartridges to use. The skill energy cost is relatively low. I think the play pattern with this is that you want to wait until you have all 3 cartridges before using this skill. One thing to note about Ilia is that unlike her original incarnation, which was a long-range mana caster, she is now a close-range mana caster. And as of now, the common play pattern with close-range mana casters has been their high damage, close-range, basic attacks are where they get a lot of their DPS from. So I think that with Ilia, you'll want to use those for accumulating a combo count, dealing nice burst damage, and also building up this unique alchemical gauge, which she shares with her original incarnation, to then unleash a powerful skill too. Now, notably, there's no utility here. There's no Scorch Rend, no Burn, no Dispel on this, not even a Strength Amp or anything like that. This is just purely used for damage, but I will say that the fact that the area of effect increases based on the number of cartridges consumed, that has a little bit of quiet utility to it, in Jaldabaoth specifically, because having a large area of effect makes it so that you can hit multiple weak point orbs at once. You know, on Master, Jaldabaoth will summon 4 weak point orbs at times, and I think on Master he does that. I'm trying to think if that's the raid variant only, but he definitely summons multiple minions at once and multiple minion spawning portals at once, right? So if nothing else, those are things that if you have a big area of effect, you can deal with lots of enemies without having to reposition yourself constantly. The other thing that's nice about close range mana casters, they're not as reliant on having their skills available to deal enough damage to deal with things like weak points or spawned enemies. I've noticed this when using close range mana casters against Legend Lilith, but dealing with, let's say, the shapes that she spawns, the close range mana caster very quickly destroys all of these shapes, some characters may struggle a little bit. If you're like Tiki, you're not in dragon form, let's say, you might have some trouble just breaking those shapes. That's not a problem for a close-range Manicaster in general. You're going to have good damage on your basic attacks, regardless of where you are on your skill cooldowns. So I think that she's going to be pretty nice for crowd control situations. Close-range Manicasters have done really well in invasion events. I feel like that'll continue to be the case here. And so for Jaldabaoth, crowd control is a central element of that fight. So although there's no affliction, no dispel here, the area of effect thing is actually kind of important. Moving on to her second skill, Dragonyule Boost, this has a very high skill energy required, but the great thing is you're going to be spending a lot of your time on basic attacks, which means you're going to be unimpeded, continuously building up skill energy. So although the cost is high, you'll probably be able to use this relatively frequently. Not super frequently, but frequently enough that I think you could actually build on what it provides. So it grants the entire team a team defense amp, and it completely fills the alchemy gauge as well. The max amp level is 3 here, so this isn't just a self amp, this is actually a team defense amp in one skill. That's pretty interesting. For survival, that's helpful. I think that the way that it would work, since it's a team amp and then you're reapplying another team amp, would be that it would actually level up without you having to go through multiple applications of self amps. But I could be mistaken on that. I'm still not completely intimately familiar with the amp system, but either way, I think that this is a pretty good skill considering you don't have to use this super often. It's not going to be interrupting your combos, you're going to use it when it's available. The fact that it completely fills the alchemy gauge means you're going to ready up full throttle ride for use, and there are some other benefits for that. When you fill the alchemy gauge, that is how you get alchemic cartridges. So you can stack up to 3 of those, and every time you fill your gauge, you get 1 more cartridge in stock. Her co-ability is Gauge Accelerated plus 20%, which is standard for Manicasters, and her chain co-ability is also just fairly standard here. Above 10 hits, you get some additional wind res. Her abilities are also, not too complicated. She's pretty straightforward, but she has a high damage output. So I don't think that she's actually as hard to play, even as regular Ilia. There's no special force strike that you have to manage here. I feel like she's actually a little bit easier to play, and probably easier to play than Gatov as well. He has multiple stances going on in his kit. I think Ilia is a little bit easier to optimize on. Her abilities are Alchemic Agility 2, which dodging carries out additional attacks toward the target. So both dodge attacks and your basic attacks are going to fill up your alchemy gauge, and the rest of this ability goes on to talk about that. So the ability also grants the user an alchemy gauge. The gauge fills when standard attacks and dodge attacks connect with enemies, and each time one charge of the gauge is filled, you get a cartridge. So essentially you fill up the gauge, you get a cartridge, you fill up the gauge again, you get your second cartridge, and then your third cartridge, and then you can use those to power up your first skill. When you get those cartridges, you're also going to be getting Starfall Spirit 2. It grants the user Starfall Spirit effect. This ability grants the user the Starfall Spirit effect for 15 seconds when an alchemic cartridge is consumed. So by using it, you get the bonus. Starfall Spirit can stack up to 3 times, and each stack increases the user's strength and critical rate by 15%. So that is pretty legit. That's a significant buff. It can stack up to 3 times. Each of these is a 15% buff, and you get it when the alchemic cartridges are consumed, which this consumes all your cartridges using your first skill. So as I'm reading this, my understanding is that this would be a 45% invisible strength buffs and 45% critical rate buffs. But because they're called Starfall Spirit, for whatever reason, they are Curse of Nihility immune. And so are the alchemic cartridges themselves. This is a difference with standard Ilia. Dragonyule Ilia, just being a later generation unit, a unit released later into the life of the game, her buffs, her personal kind of unique buffs, are immune to Curse of Nihility. So maybe the original Ilia they're saving for like a mana spiral, since she is kind of like a pseudo Gala adventurer with her dual resistances. Maybe at that time they'll make her immune as well, because that has been a complaint with her and a little bit of a disappointment. But at least with Dragonyule Ilia, that's not a concern at all. So no element of her kit is going to be impeded by Curse of Nihility. And some of them, like this team defense amp, in fact, are designed for that environment. So yeah, not a whole lot else to talk about with her. Stun res 100%. In simulation, if you look at the DPS sim in co-op play, and if you also look at results posted on Reddit, it looks like Dragonyule Ilia is very good in a co-op setting as far as her damage output. She's been able to get very quick clears in comps with 2 to 3 Dragonyule Ilia against Legend Volk. These clears go as low as below 2 minutes from what I've seen and hover in the 2:30 range. So that's a totally fine avenue to use her if that's what you want to do. Have also seen some clears of Jaldabaoth with her. I think a popular thing that's come up is pairing her with Gala Leonidas. Gala Leonidas does have a chain co ability that gives you Dragon Gauge for every hit or every certain number of hits you do, and rewards high hit count characters with lots of Dragon Gauge. Well, close range mana casters are probably the highest hit count of any kind of adventurer, especially when you pair them with overdamage, let's say from Kuzunaha or Yukata Cassandra, or just as a shared skill from Sandalphon or Summer Verica. They have extremely high hit counts. You can hit 999 combo count very fast. So a popular strategy I've seen discussed is pairing her with Gala Leonidas and then using her as a dragon engine of sorts to very quickly get a lot of Dragon Gauge. You can put Gala Mars on her, and by doing that, whenever your shapeshift is undone, you're going to charge up all your skills, including shared skills. So if you wanted to throw on like Humanoid Mercury and Dragonyule Mim shared skills, those further build the Dragon Gauge. And every time your Mars is undone, you're also going to be able to use Dragonyule Boost, which normally has a high skill energy cost. So you can get your alchemy gauges, your team defense amps ramped up. That seems like a pretty fun approach. You are sacrificing one co-ability slot if you want to do that. And I think for co-op, from at least the simulation I guess the popular default one, right? It doesn't seem like Leonidas is an optimal backline choice for Dragonyule Ilia in the way that she's built there. Maybe you could rebuild her with more of a kit centered around Dragon Transformation. Maybe that will end up being better for her. Not sure on that. But either way, even under the default assumptions, which may or may not be super highly tuned at this point with her having been a new character, she's still kind of atop the charts near Undercover Grace, near Gala Leonidas, Gala Gatov, Gala Laxi. A lot of the strong and newer Flame Adventurers are still at the top of the charts there, and she's right alongside them. So I think that actually bodes better for her than I would have expected. I wasn't sure upon reading her kit on the day of release, if she would even be Nihility immune. It would be such a shame to have like a defense amp and then the rest of her kit non-functional. So thankfully she is immune to Curse of Nihility. It does sting a little bit with the original Ilia not having that luxury, but overall, Dragonyule Ilia seems like a strong adventure. She's putting up pretty good results, and here's where I want to think about the future a little bit. So specifically when thinking about Primordial Midgard Swarmer, Gala Gatov, for existing content, probably going to do just as well as Ilia. Maybe against Jaldabaoth, it might be a little bit harder to deal with all of the enemies using Gatov, but Gatov, on the other hand, can dispel, which Ilia can't, and that's helpful when Jaldabaoth gets a regen buff or gets 100% defense or strength buff if that accidentally happens, so that can be useful too. And for Asura, having a little bit of dispel also helps, but the AoE to deal with the orbs, probably going to lean toward Dragonyule Ilia on that one. But when it comes to Midgard Swarmer and the Primordial Great Worms, when they release, the big thing that Dragonyule Ilia could have going for her is if there is any kind of hit count mechanic or hit count check, because she is going to be one of the two adventurers that excels at hit counts in the flame element and still has a really high damage output. So I would say her and Gala Leonidas fit that description. Very, very high hit count quickly. Her being even better than Leonidas in this respect. And specifically if there's something that's like Surtur, right? Surtur had this whole new mechanic where you had to use standard attacks to deal damage, so you couldn't use force strikes. So that made it so that rapid fire mana casters weren't quite as good. If there's something like that, like a shield that you have to break with standard attacks, and it's based on your hit count, not the damage dealt, all of a sudden that's like the dream scenario where Dragonyule Ilia is super critical for fulfilling that function. That could be a thing, and it's not that there aren't other adventurers who can't do that. Jaldabaoth has standard attack co-ability. She also can hit count pretty well with the best of them, so I would also put her in that conversation. Summer Mitsuhide, if you have her, she's limited, has high hit counts, but they come from her skills largely. She does have good attack rate on her normal attacks, but yeah, there are a select amount of flame adventurers who can do this hit count thing. I think Dragonyule Ilia is in that ilk, and so that warrants a little bit of consideration for me. It's an area that the devs have been willing to step into. We saw it with Ayaha and Datoha, where it seemed designed to challenge the Karina supremacy that we saw on the lower difficulties. Once Legend released, having these high hit count checks meant that, hey, it wasn't just as easy to cheese your way through. So I could see there being very specific mechanics. I would think that maybe they would want to make mechanics that push us away from Leonidas a little bit, just because he's been so pervasive that we may want to see some fresh faces in Flame content, and perhaps one of those faces is going to be Dragonyule Ilia. So that's all pure speculation, pure theory crafting about future content, but I wouldn't be shocked with how well she's just doing with a pure DPS kit. I wouldn't be super shocked to see her in the future. And another thing to think about with those Great Worms is we've gotten kind of used to this environment in which we can solo everything and auto everything, and co-op is sort of one and done. Well, when the Great Worms were first released, solo was not a viable option for the vast majority of players. It was extremely difficult. The checks were extremely high. And the initial design philosophy of Dragalia Lost was that solo in general was much harder than co-op. Co-op made things easier. And somewhere along the way, I think it's when we got the second anniversary and we got a formal split in solo and co-op in the menus. I think at that point, they decided solo is going to be easier now, and co-op is going to be harder. We're going to have different HP values. We're going to have different mechanics even for the solo and the co-op variant. But prior to that, one of the things that encouraged and fostered co-op play was quests were actually easier in co-op and very hard to do solo. So Dragonyule Ilia is a character where I'm not sure if in auto or solo she'll actually be all that impressive relative to any other pretty good auto DPS backliner. Like, let's say you just throw on Jaldabaoth. She's a pretty good backline DPS option for auto content. I don't know that Dragonyule Ilia would actually be any better than her necessarily, right? But for co-op, where you have a lot more control, you can coordinate a lot more. If co-op is the way of the future with these primordial Great Worms, as co-op once was the way with the original Great Worms, then I think the conversation around Dragonyule Ilia starts to look a little bit more lucrative, because I don't see her as being a solo bombshell, if you will. And I think Gatov actually might be a little bit better in that regard just because of the utility that he provides. So that is where I'm at on Dragonyule Ilia's showcase. A lot to consider, a lot to think about with her. I am going to be summoning for her for collection reasons. I just want to have her in my roster, in my crew. Let me know what you think about Dragonyule Ilia in the comments below, especially if you've already summoned for her. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts and impressions having played with her a little bit and tested her out. That is going to do it for today though, everyone. So thank you as always for watching. Take care, and I'll see you next time.